Okay, hi guys, welcome to Biology Online with Henny van Vieren. Okay, welcome. Today we'll be focusing on photosynthesis, so please follow along. The PowerPoint presentation is on the OneDrive if you want to download it. It's just called Cell Processes Photosynthesis. Okay, here we go. Alrighty, so as you know, plants, they are the producers, and the rest of us, we are all consumers. So anything that can photosynthesize is a producer. Not only plants can photosynthesize, but some bacteria, specifically archaeobacteria, and also some protists can photosynthesize. So we'll be looking into this process, how the energy from the sun is stored into a chemical molecule called glucose, and that molecule glucose is then used in respiration, which we covered in the previous lesson. So photosynthesis is the process by which plants, some bacteria, and some protists use the energy from the sunlight to produce sugar, which cellular respiration converts into ATP, the fuel used by all living things. And you'll remember that I said ATP is like a rechargeable battery. It is adenosine triphosphate, which means there's 3 phosphates on there, and when it's triphosphate, it is charged. When it is needed to give off the energy, it will split off one of its phosphates, releasing energy, and then it becomes ADP, adenosine diphosphate. The adenosine diphosphate then goes back to the mitochondria and gets basically recharged to become ATP. So your overall equation is 6 molecules of water plus 6 molecules of carbon dioxide gives us 1 molecule of glucose plus 6 molecules of oxygen. Isn't it amazing that I've said this many times in the class, but it's just the sun sits, the plant sits there in the sun and just says, I'm in the mood for some sugar. Sunshine, give me some. And it literally takes the CO2 out of the air. All the carbon, everything that is basically that tree, that enormous tree, was the carbon from this CO2, which is a gas, which we cannot see with the naked eye. So I find this whole process incredibly amazing. So the plants photosynthesize within their leaves. The CO2 goes into the leaves, and also the O2 comes out of the leaves. When plants actually have their leaves, you can see that most of them are arranged to look directly at the sun, so that they're not under each other's shadow, where they would not be as effective in photosynthesizing. So we said that the raw materials are water and carbon dioxide, enters the leaf, and the product of photosynthesis is sugar, oxygen, and oxygen. The oxygen leaves out of the leaf. This is a cross section, which is really important, a cross section of a leaf. You need to be able to identify this. It has been asked in the past that you should identify it. Some actual papers have also asked to draw this. So when you look at it from the top, the sunlight will come in from this area over here, and then it hits the waxy cuticle, okay, or cuticle in this case. All of these layers need to be transparent. The reason they need to be transparent is that they need to allow the light through to the chloroplasts, and those are these dark dots that you see here within the palisade cells. So we have the upper epidermis, which is skin. Epidermis means skin. We also refer to our own skin as the epidermis. And the upper epidermis, as I just said, is transparent. Then we have the palisade cells. These are elongated cells that sit at the top of a leaf. The reason why they're elongated is that as sunlight enters, the chloroplasts will be scattered around, and they will be arranged in a way to minimize them from being in the shadow of the chloroplast above them. Further down, we then move into the spongy mesothelium. Spongy mesothelium is where all these gases that are produced or needed, so the CO2 that comes in and the oxygen that is produced, can leave the leaf, and it travels through the spongy mesothelium and out the stoma, which you can see here. Stoma are almost like the spiracles in an insect. These are little holes or little mouths that can open and close as needed to allow CO2 to fuse in and also to allow oxygen to diffuse out, simply because of the concentration gradient that's going to exist either side of these lower epidermis. You will still have some chloroplast in your spongy mesothelium, but not as many as in your palisade cells. And the reason for that is quite simply that your light intensity as you go deeper into the leaf will be less and less. So you can think about it, a plant with a really big leaf that is thin will most likely be found in areas of lower light, because it's trying to catch as much sunlight as it can. Because the light will not be as bright, it cannot penetrate very deep into the cells, into the leaf itself. But if you compare that to, for instance, a succulent that grows in the desert where there's a lot of sunlight, they are usually thick-leaved, and the sun can penetrate quite a bit into them, so they will have potentially more chloroplasts lower down in the leaf themselves. And over here you have a bundle, which basically it's a vein. As you can see, it has the xylem and the phloem. So xylem and phloem. Phloem carries the food. So in other words, the glucose that's going to be made is carried by the phloem. So this goes down to the roots and everywhere else it is needed, out of the leaf and then anywhere else it is needed, whether it's the trunk or the stem or the roots. The xylem brings the water up to where it is needed, and the water comes from the roots, and that root, actually the way that the water flow is through turgor, and that turgor is maintained, or turgor pressure is maintained by a process called transpiration. Transpiration is where your water molecules within this spongy mesothelium, they will evaporate and then exit the stoma, and this exiting of the stoma will basically create a lower concentration of water molecules over here, which will then create diffusion from the xylem and into this area, which then creates a lower pressure and pulling up of more water. So consequently, that is transpiration. Alright, so but our photosynthesis takes place within the chloroplasts. So again, we just said that the water enters the root and is transported up to the leaf through specialized cells known as xylem. Remember, phloem, the F sound, phloem for food. Xylem is for the water. Okay, land plants must guard against drying out or desiccation. The stomata can allow gas to enter and also help to maintain moisture control, just like the spiracles in an insect. Likewise, the oxygen produced during photosynthesis can only pass out of the leaf through the open stomata. You can think of it as the leaves doing little burps of oxygen, isn't it? I think it's awesome. Unfortunately for the plant, while these gases are moving between the inside and the outside of the leaf, a great deal of water is also lost, because the water at that stage is in water vapor and it will be flowing out with the oxygen. So here's a picture of the this is a scanning electron micrograph that has been colored of a stomata, and you can see the two guard cells, and they are the ones that can close, and this one over here is closed. Almost looks like a little eye. Okay, so when we look at the chloroplast itself, remember those are the black dots within the cells, and I've shown you them under the microscope when we looked at oh no, I can't remember the name of the pondweed, but yes. So the thylakoid, these structures that look like pancake stacks, they are called the thylakoid. And when you only talk about one, it's a thylakoid, but when you talk about a collection of them, so the whole pancake stack, that is your grana. And grana, the singular of grana is granum, but when you talk about all of them together, they are the grana, and then a single pancake within your stack is known as the thylakoid. Between the thylakoid, you have these connecting lamellae that will connect between the grana. And then the liquid portion that you will find between the grana, just like the matrix in the mitochondria, this liquid portion over here is called the stroma. So you need to know that we have an outer membrane, then we have an inner membrane. Inside the inner membrane, we have the liquid portion, which is called the stroma, and then we have the thylakoids that make up the grana, and the lamellae which connect them all. Okay, very important. So, the stages of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a two-stage process. The first process is the light-dependent process. Light reactions requires the direct energy of the light to make energy carrier molecules that are used in the second process. So we have a light-dependent process, which obviously needs light, and then you have a light-independent process, or the dark reactions. They occur with the products from the light-dependent process. So the one leads into the other, and they're used to form carbon-carbon covalent bonds, which then become the carbohydrate. And remember, glucose is a sugar, and sugars are carbohydrates. Dark reactions can occur in the dark, but obviously they don't have to only occur at nighttime. They can occur during daytime. They are not called dark reactions because they have to be dark. They are called dark reactions because they are independent of light. So it's better that we use the terms light dependent and light independent. Now the first step of photosynthesis, as we said, is the light dependent reaction. And the light dependent reactions occur in the grana of the chloroplast. So in those pancake stacks, on that membrane of the thylakoid is where the light dependent process will take place. Then from there, the products will go into the light independent process, and that happens in the stroma, which is again like the liquid phase inside your chloroplast. Okay, so basically sunlight comes in, hits the chlorophyll in our thylakoid, which makes up the grana. That then releases some products, okay, usually in the form of NADP, H and ATP. That then goes into our light independent cycle, which is called the Calvin cycle, and this is where we then create glucose as a product. So in a little bit more detail, the light dependent process, light strikes the chlorophyll in such a way to excite the electrons to a higher energy state. In a series of reactions, the energy is converted along an electron transport process, almost like the electron transport chain, also on the membrane in the mitochondria. This then forms ATP and NADPH. Water is basically split in the process, releasing the oxygen, and then the hydrogen is going with your NADP, becoming NADPH, and your electron goes with ATP. The ATP and the NADPH used to make the these bonds between the carbon molecules then go into the light independent process. So the carbon dioxide then is used and modified with the addition of hydrogen, and also and it uses the C and the O and then the hydrogen to form these carbohydrates. So remember, C6H12O6. So you can hear that the C6 is the same, C6 and the O2, both from carbon dioxide. Okay, and this is called carbon fixation, and it's also a great way, and why it's so important, why we need to plant trees. If we plant trees, we actually help with carbon fixation, taking some of the CO2 out and basically building this tree. So the more trees we plant and the fewer trees we cut down, the more we actually keep that fixated carbon out of pollution of the air. Now, what is a limiting factor? A limiting factor, when you look at the photosynthesis equation, a limiting factor will be anything that needs to go into the process, in other words, the reactants, to produce the product. So if we look at the reactants, we've got water. That's a limiting factor. In other words, if we don't have enough water, the process cannot continue. So if a plant dries out, it cannot produce glucose, which means it cannot go into respiration, which means it would then not have energy to do cellular processes, which means it will die. If it doesn't have enough CO2, it cannot produce glucose, which will then go into respiration in the mitochondria to produce energy to do cellular process, which means it will die. Okay, can you see we're talking about, if you are going to answer this to an excellence level, you need to talk about the consequences down the line. What else is needed in here? And that is something that is not really shown in here. But if I grab a pen down here and yellow, we will have sunlight coming in, and we also need chlorophyll. Okay, so this is not easy writing with a mouse. Anyways, so the chlorophyll over here and sunlight over here. So just like when we don't have water or carbon dioxide, we need sunlight. Without sunlight, this process cannot go further because we need that energy from the sun to excite those electrons. And we need the chlorophyll because that is your workbench that actually allows this whole process to happen. So any of these four things can be limiting factors: your water, your carbon dioxide, your sun, or your chlorophyll. Okay. So low light intensity, lack of carbon dioxide, and also low temperature. Now, how low temperature, you might ask? Now, if you think about it, low temperature in general is because when we have a low temperature, what happens to your enzymes? What happens to your kinetic energy of any chemical at low temperatures? In year 11, you learnt about rate of reaction, and what it means is that your kinetic energy slows down. And when your kinetic energy slows down, your molecular movement reduces. And if your molecular movement reduces, you have fewer collisions of the enzyme and its binding site or its substrate. And if you have fewer collisions between the enzyme and its substrate, you will have fewer successful collisions between the enzyme and its substrate at the actual binding site with enough energy. Consequently, the whole process will slow down. So in wintertime, plants will therefore, I imagine, photosynthesize less, and that's also why some deciduous plants will lose their leaves in winter and do not do any photosynthesis at all because the temperature is too low. Okay, so looking at how this works mathematically, your rate of photosynthesis will go up if your light intensity increases. So as this increases, your rate of photosynthesis go up, but it actually plateaus off. You can see we can only make the light brighter and brighter and brighter up to a certain point, and at that point you're going to have a limiting factor coming in. So either you're going to not have enough water to maintain the reaction, or you're going to not have enough carbon dioxide to maintain. So in this case, you can see when you have a low concentration of carbon dioxide in the air, 0.03, your rate of photosynthesis would be lower because CO2 will be the limiting factor. When you have a higher concentration of CO2, it will actually be a higher rate of photosynthesis. And that's why the guys who breed aquarium plants, they actually bubble CO2 into their tanks to increase the CO2 levels in their tanks so that the plants can photosynthesize faster and grow faster. So in this case, light, if the light is too low, that would be a limiting factor, but also here we're specifically referring to the CO2. Now, yeah, so I just covered that. Not enough light will mean, yeah, not enough light is a lower reaction, and not enough CO2 is a lower reaction or will be a limiting factor. Okay, and lastly we talked about temperature. Enzymes help to speed up because remember they're biological catalysts. The rate of photosynthesis will be limited if it is too cold for the enzymes to work properly. We learned about your optimum temperature of an enzyme, didn't we? And for humans we know that this is around about 37 degrees Celsius. So when the temperature is too high, they will denature, and that's a permanent change. However, when the temperature is too low, they will slow down, kinetic energy will slow down, and consequently they will not have as many successful reactions or successful collisions. Okay, I'll also set you some later on when we do revision. We'll be looking at some of the exam skills and so forth. Alright, but this was from one of the exams. The limiting factors of photosynthesis: increasing the light intensity. What is the factor limiting the rate of photosynthesis at point X on the graph? So here's point X. So over here, what is affecting your rate of photosynthesis? And you can simply say that is going to be light intensity, because it is before the carbon dioxide, or the temperature in this case, plays any role. Can you see? We're before temperature starts to change. So in this case, the only thing that's going to affect the rate of photosynthesis is the light intensity. Okay, and yeah, so the light intensity at this point, photosynthesis may still be limited by other factors such as temperature or carbon dioxide, but it's before the levels start to decrease. Now, when you look at account for the increase in the rate of photosynthesis in graph 1, when the temperature is raised from 20 to 30 degrees, the increase, so you can see our rate went higher. Obviously, it is closer to the plant's optimum temperature for its enzymes, therefore it will have a higher rate of photosynthesis. This is due to a higher kinetic energy, which results in higher collisions and higher successful collisions, which means a higher number of reactions taking place per unit of time, just like we said in year 11 with rates of reactions. Okay, now name an environmental factor other than temperature which may be limiting the rate at point Y. Why does it cap off? Why does it not keep on increasing? And another environmental factor, remember the three that we said: we need light, we need temperature, we need water. So it could be a shortage of water, or it could also be a shortage of carbon dioxide. And the last thing that it could potentially be was not enough chlorophyll available, but that is probably more to do with light intensity. So it's going to be water, or it's going to be carbon dioxide. Okay, and then also remember your light, the wavelength has to do with the color, and what is all the colors that are being absorbed into a plant or into chlorophyll is everything except for green. So if you're going to just shine a green light onto a plant, it will actually not get a lot of light because all the green is reflected. That's why plants seem green. You see the light that is reflected back at your eye, not the light that is absorbed. So you can see here, when the light is absorbed more, your rate of photosynthesis is higher. But in this spectrum over here, where the wavelength is different, remember Roy G Biv, G is right here in the middle, green, so it's going to be lowest where it's green, your rate of reaction, and then as the wavelength increases further away from green, your rate of photosynthesis increases. Yeah, so the question is, what evidence is there that green is not the only color that has an effect? That the reason is Roy G Biv. You can look at the wavelength and green will be in the middle, but as you basically come from yellow into green, it's going to show that it actually goes down. Otherwise there would have been a very steep dip right in the middle. Okay, the rate of photosynthesis is high at wavelengths such as 450 to 650 where the absorption is low. Again guys, I don't think this is necessary to know for our exams, but it is good to be able to interpret this graph. But you don't need to remember those names, the actual nanometers. And that is the end of today, so I hope it helps. If you have any questions, please email them to me or put them in the in the social comments. Also, I will send out a quick Education Perfect link for you just to make sure that you got all the information. So a little quiz, probably about 5 questions. Okay, have a great day. Remember to stay safe and stay healthy. Goodbye.